Energy Transition, episode number 66. Our topic today is more oil production cuts. Irina Slav, Temi Nimet, David Blackman. Good morning, good afternoon.
Good morning.
Hello.
Morning.
Morning. Please let me transmit a video from
The countries that had agreed to do the voluntary cuts have extended that voluntary cuts to end of 24. And I would have to call it the Saudi lollipop, which is 1 million barrel of reduction for the start that starts at the 1st of July. And that million is also extendable. We, as a cluster of 23 countries, we will do whatever it is necessary to bring stability to this market.
Well, this is the original video from Wall Street Journal. David, Irina's interesting in these questions, if you allow me. Does it look like a consensus meeting for you, Irina?
Well, it usually does at the end when they do their news conference. I read that there was some disagreements and hence the Saudi lollipop, because nobody else but Saudi Arabia has to cut additionally. And the United Arab Emirates even got the opportunity to increase their production by about 200,000 barrels daily. So, yeah, eventually they always agree on whatever it is.
Including Russia.
Well, yeah, Russia has no problem, and Russia says it's cutting its 500,000 barrels daily, but they're not announcing figures officially, so we don't know. But apparently those reports that Russia and Saudi Arabia may be, at odds about production because Russia may not be cutting as promised. Apparently, this has been resolved, or at least, not serious enough to derail the meeting, the way I see it, and from what we hear from Prince bin Salman.
Great. David, let me show you a picture to ask you something. Oil prices have been falling sharply over the last few months, tend to continue. And the point is, we can see on April the same standard, same pattern that we are having today. So
Yeah.
what do you see in this?
Well, what's happening is, the Chinese economy, coming out of all the crazy COVID restrictions they had last year, has not recovered at the pace the market and analysts had assumed that it would, or hoped that it would, I guess. And so you see this need. Plus, Russia has not been fulfilling its promise to cut 500,000 barrels a day since February, and everyone knows that. They're desperate for the revenues to finance their war. And so that is a source of tension with the Saudis and UAE in particular within OPEC plus. And that's why we see Saudi Arabia now just saying unilaterally, we're going to cut 1 million barrels a day. That's the biggest lollipop in world history, I guess. Quite a way to characterize that. You got to give the guy. He's the first Saudi oil minister I've ever seen that displays a bit of a sense of humor in all this. So that's good.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah. But yeah, and so what's happening is all these analysts are saying, well, second half of the year, we're going to have a big production deficit. We're going to have demand's going to come roaring back in China. It's going to stay strong in the United States, which may happen in the United States. But the wild card is China and what happens there. And right now, their economy is not growing at the pace people thought it would early in the year. And whether that's actually going to happen in the second half of the year is anyone's guess. But right now in the U.S., we're seeing the rig count just drop pretty rapidly now. We're down 15% since the first of the year. In our rig count in the United States, I suspect it's going to drop even more beginning in July when the second half of 2023 budgets kick in at all these corporate producers. And we'll see another drop, pretty significant drop in the rig count, probably another 10%. So, U.S. producers are not anticipating a supply deficit in the second half of the year. And, we'll see if these analysts are right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And tell me, I'm not sure about that. If I see in an article that OPEC excludes Bloomberg, Reuters, and Wall Street Journal from the meeting. Is it true?
Well, I mean, my understanding is that they excluded some people. Who those people are, I don't know. Maybe it was certain members from Wall Street Journal. I'm not sure, but actually it was quite a clever PR move because most people probably weren't paying too much attention about OPEC and their meeting and whatever. But by creating this controversy, suddenly people had their heads up like, wait a second, what's OPEC doing? Why are they doing this? And maybe we should pay attention. So if anything, I thought it was a clever PR move for that. An interesting thing was what Irina mentioned about Emirates being able to increase their production. And I'm wondering, is that to help them pay for COP28?
Those things cost money. I mean, they probably have to expand their airport to accommodate all the private jets that are going to be flying.
Yeah, exactly. In. Maybe they'll have a floating airport. That would be funny.
A floating airport. A good one. David, we have interesting to see continuing increasing the demand for oil. So they expect 2023 to at least 2 million barrels more than today.
Yeah.
Wow.
And and that could happen, I guess. I mean, in the third world, in developing nations, certainly demand for oil continues to rise pretty rapidly. But all that's been offset by China and its lack of growth. I mean, China's economy has expanded around 3% on a annualized basis so far this year. I think a lot of these analysts were expecting it to grow by 7 or 8%, and are still holding out the belief that that will happen in the second half of the year. And if it does, I mean, even the IEA is projecting very significant rise in oil demand the second half of the year. So there is a consensus around that. And the only contrarian I've seen in all the reporting out of this OPEC meeting is one analyst from Citicorp, who was the one guy out there that I saw saying, no, we're not going to have a surplus in the second half of the year, and prices are going to go below 70. So if prices go below 70, the problem for OPEC is this, and OPEC Plus, is that Saudi Arabia is the only country. I mean, I guess you could include the UAE in this to some extent, but it's really the only country that has pretty significant ability to cut volumes at this point. And everyone else really needs these revenues and these current production volumes to maintain their social welfare states. And it's going to be tough if China's economy doesn't really come roaring back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because just a quick note, China's oil demand is hitting records regardless of GDP growth numbers. And I've always found this fascinating how forecasters expect double-digit growth from China consistently, or as David said, 7 or 8%. Why? They're growing. Leave them alone. I mean, it is growing compared to Germany. China is overperforming, So maybe I think there's a kind of fixation on GDP numbers from China instead of watching, all demand numbers. And I mean, all demand numbers based on actual demand, not forecast demand. And these are at record heights.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other issue with that is with these projections is that it's a confidence game, So are they trying to talk the numbers down to help Biden refill the SPR at the price he wants? And not at what OPEC will do, which because they're apparently the OPEC sweet spot is between $80 and $90 a barrel, but Biden wants to refill it. I have the numbers here. He only wants to pay between $67 and $72 a barrel to refill. And in the summertime is normally when demand goes up in the United States and North America for traveling and so on. So, again, is this a confidence game trying to keep the numbers down, even though the demand is there? And if anyone was looking realistically at the numbers, they would see that and invest and buy accordingly.
So you mean that could be artificial pressure to not produce enough, or to produce more than necessary?
Or
No,
to
keep
affect the
prices
futures
lower.
markets, right? To affect the
Right.
prices.
You mentioned SPR, and it's interesting because there is a SPR at the side of the producers, and for let me see, the production target is 40 million barrels per day for OPEC, and they are not reaching this level. So what's the point here for the SPR for the producer side?
Well, they have been warning Saudi Arabia and the UAE and others. They have been warning that OPEC's spare production capacity is in decline. The Saudis said they're working to boost theirs to 13 million BPD by 2027 or something like that. But it's not happening fast. And if prices are where they are and they're stuck there, maybe they'll delay these plans to boost their production capacity, because on the one hand they would want to, as it's trendy to say now, to monetize this resource they have as quickly as possible, which could be why they're boosting production capacity. But on the other hand, when you have prices stuck below 80, it makes you probably ask questions about the longer term outlook. What if the large economies of the world enter a recession? Or even if this current kind of sluggishness, economic sluggishness in the big markets continue, maybe they'll postpone this capacity build. So I think this is what the situation is. And they have been warning our spare capacity is falling.
Yeah. And
Not
asking for
new.
more investment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Saudi Arabia is a great example of this. I mean, they're with this million barrel a day cut, they're going from. I mean, they've only been producing 10 million barrels a day. They have significant spare capacity above that, and now they're going to go to 9 million barrels a day. So I mean, they're cutting well back. Probably they're going to be 3 million barrels a day below what they're really capable of producing from Saudi Arabia. And that's a pretty significant sacrifice in terms of their national revenues and replenishing their own sovereign wealth fund that has been very significantly diminished and depleted here over the last several years as they try to continue to try to stabilize this market. So you also have to kind of wonder how long Saudi Arabia is going to be willing to be the one country in this big group of 23 different countries that is always the one willing to throw out the big lollipops. And it's there has to be a limit to their willingness to do that.
Well, I was curious about the what they said about the African countries and how they weren't actually meeting their quotas.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
and I thought, okay, so what's going on in Africa that is affecting those numbers? And is it just lack of investment there? Is it the sort of things that go on with their pipelines and their production and whatnot that they just can't, that there's issues there, they can't produce enough? I don't know.
Yeah. And of course, in Algeria, you have the civil wars
Yeah.
stopping and starting and always disrupting production. And I guess to some extent Libya as well. So I mean, all that has a cumulative impact.
Yeah,
reduce
Libya's been
investments.
exempted from the cuts
Oh, that's right.
anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but Nigeria and Angola, yeah,
Nigeria.
they have been complaining of what you said, Tammy. Pipeline theft, force majeure situations, and not enough investments. The super majors are leaving Nigeria because they're
Yeah.
focusing on the more lucrative and lower risk
Mhm.
locations. It's the same in Angola. Angola has I read about it. They have a problem with natural depletion, and they can't seem to be able to attract investment. So
Right.
they have consistently failed to meet their quotas, which is why now OPEC adjusted the quotas so they're, closer to the actual production level.
And what's the reason that OPEC is warning about increasing world refining capacity? Something that we are not seeing ahead. What are they saying?
That's a good question, because I'm wondering if there's anticipation here that the EU is going to permanently close their refineries because of the Green Deal or whatever. And
Imagine.
so if because like in France, the refineries there's been ongoing maintenance and work stoppages and so on. And are they saying we need refining capacity outside of these
Outside,
major
yeah.
areas? We need to increase it in the Gulf and maybe in Asia and whatnot, because that honestly is where the future market is. So maybe they're hoping to cash in on that and not just sell the crude, but to also be selling the refined products.
Yeah.
It's
That
not the
makes
case
sense.
of the US. I suppose US not reducing refining capacity. It's the opposite, no, David?
Well, we had a big expansion from ExxonMobil. Actually, there was an announcement last week of a 500,000 barrel a day refinery, supposedly, that's going to be built up in Minnesota. We'll see if that actually happens. It's awfully
Yeah,
hard
when?
to, right, when, I mean, over what time frame.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would anticipate refining capacity in the United States to drop in the coming years for the same reasons it's likely to drop in Europe. Because, I mean, golly, I mean, you have in Ireland, the government in Ireland considering a proposal to slaughter 200,000 cattle to meet their methane emissions commitments.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to slaughter 200,000 cattle. So, I mean, this is a mania. It's not just a plan, it's a mania and a psychosis, really, when you think about it. Uh, and so, no, we should not be surprised by any measure these governments take to reduce carbon and methane emissions in the coming years, and that could well include shutting down the refining sector in the EU.
But what's the reason that OPEC is taking care of refining capacity? Is a strong point for them because they are producers, no?
Well, yeah, if refineries are closing in Europe and the United States, or converting to biofuel production, as is happening with some refineries in the US and in Europe, there needs to be a new source of
New
refined
source.
fuels,
Yeah.
because demand
send.
is not exactly going down,
Mhm.
and they're building this capacity.
What are the similarities between OPEC and BRICS? Is there something parallel for them?
There's an overlap, I think, to an extent.
Both are
Same
increasing.
members.
Yeah, number of members, 23 members in OPEC, and BRICS
Right.
increasing.
And a lot of countries applying for membership in the BRICS. What is the investment bank? I can't remember what it's called. That BRICS originated in 2015, applying to become members of that, and apparently some countries planning to apply for formal membership in the BRICS alliance.
Mhm.
But you already have Russia in there, which is obviously a big producer in Brazil. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of synergy and overlap between those two organizations, and that could become much more extensive here in the next several months.
Yeah, exactly. With growing BRICS, probably they be more close, both systems. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
would
an
like
even
to,
bigger portion of the world oil supply will be concentrated in a group.
yeah, for sure. And I wanted to add about security in the Persian Gulf, and because if you're going to enhance your refinery capacity, you're going to need protection of shipping that stuff around.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I think it was about 2 months ago, the United Arab Emirates pulled out of a US led Persian Gulf security naval group. And now they're switching over to one that's led by China. And in this China group is Iran. Surprising. Iran is going around, hijacking tankers, but now they're going to be involved in a group providing security. I mean,
Yeah,
That
well,
makes
it depends
perfect
on
sense.
whose the
stuff, right?
tankers are. It depends
Both.
on whose the tankers are. If
Right,
they're
right.
Western tankers, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So the Chinese group has Iran, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Emirates, and of course China that will supposedly help police the Persian Gulf choke points and whatnot. I don't know if they're going to be complementary or in opposition to the American-led naval exercises or protection that goes on there. I just thought that was quite amusing that Iran would be involved in
Yeah.
one of
Who's the protection from, by the way? I mean, it appears to be assumed that the US and the Brits are the default protectors of the Persian Gulf, even though they do not actually have territory there. That's historical, I expect.
Yes.
But who is the protection from? I haven't heard
Well,
about
It's a great question.
piracy in the Persian Gulf.
Other
So
than the
it's an
attacks by
uncomfortable
Iran.
question because it implies, I really don't know enough details about it. I know about the hijacked tankers, but it's funny that when Iran seizes a tanker, it's a hijack, but when the US seizes an Iranian tanker, it's a seizure, not a hijacking. You see where I'm going with this?
For sure.
I try to have a bit of a different perspective, not pro
Right. Yeah.
either side. So yeah, who's the protection from? Especially now that the Saudis and the Iranians are, warming up to each other. I think that's the
Well, I
most
mean,
interesting part.
historically, it was meant to project power to ensure that no major power would try to invade and take it over, and to block, the choke points, so that if things did escalate into some kind of hot war or some kind of military engagement, that those transport areas would not be obstructed.
Yeah.
Right.
But of course, now when we've got sanctions being used all the time, seemingly for various reasons, then it's like, well, we're upholding sanctions, but as you say, Irina, from who, right? So that gives the international community wants to assert that power and authority to ensure that sanctions are being followed. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's the structure that historically has evolved to this point.
Yeah. And
Because I
Iran.
remember, Iran on several occasions has threatened to close off the Strait of Hormuz.
Hormuz,
And then, it made sense to have something to somehow prevent it. But now, and this is why I say this is the most important part to me, that Iran and the Saudis are now in the same camp. They're playing on the same team. So this is an interesting development with regard to the the security of the strait.
And
Well,
do not forget Venezuela, David. The president of Venezuela came to Brazil last week to visit our president. So if you need something from Venezuela to restart the production, call us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing with Iran and Saudi Arabia, I mean, it could just be as simple as offering an alternative to having a U.S. Whoops, I made her mad. Having a U.S. carrier group sailing into the Persian Gulf every time there's an upset, right? I mean, these countries that are in that region have to be getting tired of the world order that has existed since the end of World War II, in which the United States has played the role of the policeman of the world in enforcing all these sanctions, not just on Russia, but remember, Iran is the target of a ton of U.S. sanctions and EU sanctions and NATO sanctions. And so these countries that are now becoming allied in the Middle East, in that region, may be simply trying to develop an alternative to the U.S. presence, which they have to be considering to be pretty onerous and tiresome at this point after 70 years of this stuff. And who can blame them? I mean, I don't blame them. It seems to me only a natural thing, but it is rather ironic for Iran in particular to be trying to fill that role. But the thing about that is Iran probably has the most extensive naval force of any country in the region. So they're probably the only alternative.
Well, I think it's also part of the Chinese naval maritime Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah.
So, China wants to have this global network on both sea and land. And how could they trust its operation if they're going to be cultivating relationships that other entities in the world disagree with? How are they going to keep those things open? And it's also a way for China to help project its power by getting these other countries to join in with them. And it's like, well, see, everybody likes China's power, and they can project it that way.
Exactly. Well, yeah.
And to be fair to the United States, after World War II and in the 70s, a lot of those countries kind of asked for the United States to patrol those areas, to
Right.
prevent things from getting out of control. It just
Right.
seems to have gotten out of control to some
Yeah.
extent. So
That's right.
No, it's
That's
no
right.
problem.
Yeah, I mean that role as the policeman of the world, it was all a part of these international agreements that were made at the end
Yeah.
of World War II, and but it's God. I mean, there's a huge faction here in the United States that's sick and tired of spending $200 billion, $300 billion a year doing that, and
Yeah.
so I think we're in the midst with everything that's happening with China and in the Middle East and with BRICS and the threats to the petrodollar and all that. We're in the midst of seeing what's going to end up being a major shift in the quote world order, and there's going
Yeah.
to be a new world order here that's going to emerge out of all this. And I mean, nobody, I think, at this moment in time knows how all that's going to play out.
Yeah, David,
Absolutely.
but
Yeah.
yeah, but there is no restriction for the U.S. to spend again because the debt ceiling is removed. So
Yeah, apparently we can just print all the money we want.
And it has no
on
effect on anything,
printing.
right?
Yeah.
That's all. No.
Okay, people, thank you so much. It was a wonderful
Thanks.
Monday.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Have a great week.
Have a good week.
You too.
Bye.
Great day.
Bye.
Bye bye.